Welcome to Law Easy. My name is Marty Schenkman, and our topic for today's presentation is integration of personal and business financial planning. And our guest for this program is Nainesh Shah of Complete Advisors in Valley Stream, New York. Welcome.
Yes.
All right, so let's roll. So why do you have to integrate? It's an obvious question, but let's explain. Why do you have to integrate planning for a business with planning for personal retirement? If I'm coming to you and I'm planning on retiring, if I've been getting a check from my employer and I have an IRA, that's really, the planning is just the financial planning. But if I own a family business, that's a big chunk of my wealth, what's different?
So thank you for inviting, Marty. The big difference is 50 to 80% of business owners' wealth is connected with business. Now, if you don't consider that as part of your total financial plan, you are making a big mistake. And once you consider that, then there are a lot of things that needs to be done. So someone with a simple financial plan with a W-2, it's less complicated. With business owner, you can do a lot of interesting things upfront, and you can plan it for 4 or 5 years, and then you can decide how to best manage that.
So some of the things that we talked about before we started were the valuation of the business being critical, the exit strategy or how they get out of the business, how it all integrates with the retirement planning. Maybe you can elaborate a little on why the valuation process of the business is so integral to the retirement planning for the business owner.
Most of the time, business owner, when they start, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. They haven't thought about valuation. So valuation is critical. So the valuation needs to be done in multiple ways. You can go back and think about historical numbers, comparable numbers, right, and other things. And once the valuation is decided, then you can think about how to improve that value. And
we're going to do a whole separate video clip on just improving value, because that's such a significant step.
Absolutely.
And by the way, from an estate planning perspective, and we'll talk more about this in some of the other clips, you want to move the business out of the estate, or if you're doing state income tax planning with a non-grant or trust, you want to get the business moved before you start doing magic on it.
Exactly.
So value is an issue, exit strategy is an issue, and we're going to talk more about that. We had a good example and a bad example. Why don't I start with the bad example, and then you use a good example to illustrate how you integrate all this planning. So the bad example is I had a client that came to me recently. The client's in the process of selling a production company. I won't give more details. The client went to an RIA, a financial advisor, and hired a broker and even signed a contract for the business broker to sell the business. And the first thing I said to him is, if the value of the business is over $20 million and your estate is over $30 million, why are you hiring somebody to do this? The first piece of advice that someone should have said is you got to get your estate planning done first and your income tax planning done first, because if you don't address those things, you can't really market the business. And one of the things I explained is there's a continuum. On the left of the continuum, nothing's happening. On the right of the continuum, you've sold the business. As you move down that continuum, it gets harder and harder to argue, one, that you've gotten the business out of the estate for a lower value, and two, it gets harder and harder to argue with the state income tax authorities that you've transferred that business out of your name to a trust in a state that won't tax the trust, a non-grantor trust, Nevada, Alaska, South Dakota, et cetera, before you've gone too far down the continuum. And he's already been marching down because he went to somebody who did not take that holistic view that you're advocating of looking at the big picture, but rather was really just planning for what you do with the proceeds when you get the sale done. So to me, that's an example of bad planning because it's too narrow and you're missing out on lots of opportunities. And that's even worse, as people will see in the other video clips we're going to do, because we're going to talk about value enhancement, which didn't even come up in that discussion. So you gave me a good example of how you would approach, or you recommend that people generally approach the sale and the transition of a business as part of a retirement plan for somebody in the medical instrument business. Why don't you explain what happened in that case study?
Sure. So this is a very specific medical instrument company.
But we won't give any details.
We won't give any details. And it doesn't, and the owner of the business is starting to think about how to retire.
Right, you told me he was 65.
65 years old. It's a long process. First thing that needs to be done is to understand the value of the business. Because it's a unique industry, someone like us can help trying to find the value. And the valuation takes usually 3-4 weeks to come up with. And then the reason to come to valuation is to understand where can we tweak to improve the value. Once that is done, once the business is transferred or exited out of, then you have a big chunk of money that needs to be managed, and that's where the integration part comes in. Now, if a conventional financial advisor would just come in at the last moment and try to manage the money. Business broker doesn't understand the valuation part. Business broker doesn't understand the part of the valuation enhancement. And if the owner of this medical instrument company wouldn't have come to us, he would go to business owner and not started the process in the right way. This whole process takes 5-6 years to get to a point where you do the best for your personal finance and you do best for your total financial net worth.
So I guess really the bottom line of what we're suggesting is, which is something I speak for and recommend for everyone for every situation. You want a holistic plan that takes a very broad perspective. You want a collaborative team, and you need to address, in the case of a client that has a business interest, the full range of not just the traditional estate and financial planning, but the integration of all the business issues that arise into that plan. And doing so, you can enhance the results. And I think from the time frame you're suggesting, people really need to start the planning process long before they're planning on retiring or selling, because to do it right and well can take a lot of time. And we'll enhance some of that. We'll expand on some of that in the discussion of enhancements in another video clip. Thank you for joining me. The video clip is for educational purposes only. Please don't take any action without consulting with your professional advisors.